Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Tuesday, May the 28th, 2024. Yesterday I talked about the fixed star Caput Algol. This is the head of the demon, the Medusa's head. And I want to talk about Caput Algol again today with particular reference to the royal family, because there are a few charts that do have Caput Algol in them. For example, Princess Diana, she had Venus on Caput Algol, and also her son, Prince William, has Venus on Caput Algol. And there are some other royal charts where Caput Algol seems to be important, and that's what I want to look at today. I'm not just going to look at royal charts. There are a couple of other Algol charts that I want to focus on, but the royal family and Algol, there does seem to be a little bit of a connection, something going on here. But before I do that, I want to look at the astrology and the I Ching for today. So here is the chart for today, which is Tuesday, May the 28th, 2024. Now, yesterday I got myself into knots trying to explain that the moon was moving from Capricorn into Aquarius, and my forecast very much depended on where you were. So if you were in Australia, for example, you were going to have Capricorn all day long, but moon in Capricorn all day long. If you're in the Americas, it would be different. But fortunately today, Tuesday, the moon is going to be in Capricorn pretty much all day, regardless of your time zone. So that does make things a lot simpler. So as you can see, at noon on May the 28th, 2024, which is a Tuesday, at noon New York, the moon is at 11 degrees Aquarius. Now, if you're in Australia or New Zealand, the very beginning of the day might see the moon in Capricorn, but by, I would have said, the mid-morning, the moon will be in Aquarius. So I think we can safely say that wherever you are, it is a moon in Aquarius day. And that means that we can say that the moon is conjunct Pluto. So we can see there it is, Pluto, early degrees Aquarius. So as the moon moves into Aquarius, it makes that conjunction to Pluto, and that does create a certain amount of intensity. But this conjunction is in Aquarius, it's not in Scorpio. So I would not have regarded this moon conjunct Pluto as being particularly emotional. Now, I should say that this chart has got a load of hypothetical planets in it, and I don't think we need to see the hypothetical planets. I think I'm unnecessarily confusing things. So I'm going to remove the hypothetical planets. Sorry about that, but we don't want to make things more complicated than they have to be. So there is our Moon-Pluto conjunction, and some people are going to be very focused on what they believe in. Their beliefs are what matter, and they may not be in the mood for compromise. But it doesn't mean to say that we're going to have screaming arguments or anything like that, because the moon is making a trine aspect to Jupiter. It's also making a trine aspect to Venus, and I think that influence is quite gentle, and it encourages us to talk things through. So if we have disagreements with people, I think there is a good chance that we are going to be able to come to a negotiated settlement, perhaps. Or even if we can't come to an absolute agreement, we're at least going to be able to understand other people's points of view, and I think that is going to make things easier. And I should point out that the moon and the sun are both in air signs. Moon is in Aquarius, Sun is in Gemini, and the Sun and the Moon are making a trine aspect. So there is a fortunate relationship between the Sun and the Moon, the two most important planets in the heavens. Okay, I know that technically neither the Sun nor the Moon are planets, that the Sun is a star and the Moon is a satellite, but let's keep things simple. And so the feminine and the masculine are in balance, and there's a sense that the life force is strong. Another aspect happening today is a sextile between Mercury and Saturn. So Mercury in Taurus is sextile Saturn in Pisces. And I think that could make for disciplined thinking. So when we communicate, we will be able to weigh up what we say, and we're not going to completely go over the top, which is nice. So we can calm things down, and I think we can also calm ourselves down, because Mercury sextile Saturn might be about thinking about our cognitive processes and not exaggerating, focusing on what is actually real. And another aspect going on today, which I talked about when I was looking at the week as a whole a few days ago, is the fact that Jupiter is quintile Saturn. So Jupiter and Saturn as a pair are about the business cycle, perhaps. You know, the Jupiter and Saturn are the rulers of time, the chronocrators. That means, chronos is about time. Krasi, chronocrator, it's like government rulership. And so the two rulers of time are in quintile to each other, 1/5 of the circle. And so with this Jupiter-Saturn quintile, I think that many of us are trying to find our place. We're trying to make sense of what's going on in the world, and we're trying to work out what we are supposed to be doing. And if things aren't right, we may be thinking, well, now might be a time for a regime change. When I talk, say, a regime change, okay, it could be about governments, what's going on in the world. I think a lot of us are going to be very conscious of the influence our governments have on us, and we might be thinking now is a good time to change the government. But it's also our own little world. Maybe it's our family, our group of friends, where we're working. There's just a feeling that it is perhaps time for a regime change if things are not working right. And I think we have to consider what is possible. It may be that we can do what we want to do without having a revolution. We need to realize that this Jupiter-Saturn quintile is about fiveness. It's very much a man-made aspect. And perhaps we can start to think about our thoughts and think about ways in which we can turn our thoughts into reality. Now, there are a few midpoints that I should mention. The Sun is aspecting the Pluto North Node midpoint. So there you can see there's Pluto, there's the North Node, and so the Pluto North Node midpoint is at around 7 Pisces. I think you'd agree. About 7 Pisces. So the Sun is square the Pluto North Node midpoint. And Reinhold Ebertin describes the Pluto North Node midpoint as about the tragic destiny of a group of people. Now, that doesn't mean to say it's about our group of people. It's about people in general. And so with the Sun square the Pluto North Node midpoint, that may be something about our awareness. We can see that bad things are happening in the world, that a large group of people does have a tragic destiny, and that might be bothering us, and this might be reflected in what's going on in terms of the news and what we read in the internet, sort of internet news channels, videos on YouTube. Just remind us of this tragic destiny of a large group of people. I'm not going to be specific. You can kind of work that out for yourself. And at the same time as this, Mercury is aspecting the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So this aspect is by semi-square. So when you've got Mercury on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, for some of us there could be feelings of negativity, just a feeling that things aren't quite right, and we may have very real fears about the way things are actually going to turn out. Now, these fears may well relate to the collective unconscious. We're all plugged into the collective unconscious, and the collective can feel the way things are going, can feel how bad things could be. So these fears may not be fears about ourselves and, our immediate little world, but rather fears about the collective. And I think that we might be starting to pick up on it. And further, Venus and Mars are both aspecting the Saturn-Uranus midpoint. And so Saturn and Uranus can be a very tense pair. And I think that many of us are going to have a great desire to be noticed and to have an influence, but it's not going to be easy. We may feel that we have to impose our tensions onto other people as a way to get things done, and that's, I think, not going to be really comfortable for anyone. So we perhaps have to think about our tension and why we're tense and what we do about this tension. Is it really the right thing to impose our tensions onto other people? And I mentioned this yesterday, and I'm sort of saying it again. This tension does continue, and it may be something that we need to deal with without having to bother other people with, what's going on in our heads. But, sometimes there may just be a feeling that something has to give. And if so, maybe that's just what we have to do. We maybe have to take something that has been bothering us, that needs to be said, and rather than just sit on it, stewing, we just have to be honest and open about it and just hope for the best. Turning to the heliocentric picture, as I like to do, I think it's important to know what things look like from a heliocentric perspective. And there it is. We put the sun in the center of the solar system where it should be, and you will notice that there is a conjunction between Mercury and Mars. There you can see Mercury and Mars are conjunct at 19 Pisces. So that Mercury-Mars conjunction could be quite verbal. We're going to have a lot to say, or some people are going to have a lot to say. And there may just be an atmosphere of verbal tension. And I suppose we get a similar picture from what I was saying, with Venus on the Saturn-Uranus midpoint, Mars on the Saturn-Uranus midpoint. Those are geocentric midpoints, but I was suggesting that might create a certain amount of tension. And then when we see heliocentrically that we've got Mercury-Mars conjunct, there is real tension. And I think that this tension is, it's more about society, because this is a heliocentric chart. And when we look at the heliocentric chart, we get an idea about the collective. And there's another thing about this Mercury-Mars conjunction which makes it a little bit confusing, and that is the fact that this Mercury-Mars conjunction is very close to the Saturn-Neptune midpoint. So a lot of the way people communicate in that sort of hurried, tense way, it is caused by fundamental fears. People are afraid about what's going to happen. They may be worried that they're just losing the plot. And I'm thinking, in particular, of people in government, and people in power, people in control, and they're just afraid about what's going to happen. So they perhaps feel they have to be verbally aggressive because it's the only thing they can do. If they aren't verbally aggressive, then they might just feel they're going to lose the plot and everything's going to be out of control. So they just have to do something. They have to say something. It doesn't matter. They've got to somehow get people to listen to them. And it may just all be a complete waste of time. We see a lot of tension, a lot of anger, a lot of words. And what's it for? It could be for absolutely nothing. So that's a heliocentric picture. I would have said from a heliocentric view, it's actually quite a powerful day. That there is a lot going on, but I think it actually just mirrors the geocentric picture. I think there is a lot of tension, and I don't think that there is much that we can do about it, except not to overreact and try to be as relaxed as possible. But at the same time, we can't just keep everything in. There just may be a point where we have to be clear about what we want and what we don't want. So let me now go back to the geocentric picture and consider the 12 signs. Okay, so that's a geocentric picture. And I'm now going to do my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Tuesday, May the 28th, 2024. Aries. It seems that Mars is getting rather close to Chiron. I mean, it's not exactly there, but in the next day or two, there will be a conjunction between Mars and Chiron. So Mars is your ruler. It's basically how you express yourself, and that's it. And you want to express yourself in perhaps in a very dramatic way, I think, as you have been while Mars has been moving through Aries. But Chiron may indicate a certain concern that you're maybe not being taken seriously, or that people aren't listening to you. And in fact, Aries, you may feel slightly isolated. It's like people notice you, people are listening to you, but are they fully understanding the urgency of your message? And that might concern you. I mean, that's one way of looking at Mars conjunct Chiron. Another way of looking at Mars conjunct Chiron is about your ability to help people. I mean, Chiron has a strong connection with healing and finding ways to make people feel better. And that healing is often connected with one's own wounds. If you take one of the standard views of Chiron. And so it may be, Aries, that you put a lot of your energy into helping people, healing. When I say healing, I'm talking about healing in a non-clinical sense. Unless you happen to be a doctor or a nurse and healing is your profession, or maybe you're a psychotherapist. But if you're just an ordinary human being, there are ways you can help in a general sense, and perhaps you can bring to bear your own experiences to make people's lives feel better. But still, it's going to be hard work. I think that it is a day when you will be feeling somewhat tense, because I don't think you're going to feel that you're being taken completely seriously. And you just feel that there's a lot of energy that's trapped, and it's just going to be difficult to bring that energy out into the open. And, things aren't as quite as smooth as they should be. But it's just important that you don't overreact. Sure, you could overreact. You might feel no one's listening to you, no one's taking you seriously, so you have to take some kind of dramatic initiative. But I don't think such an initiative is either necessary or desirable. You perhaps just need to do what you can and perhaps be satisfied with small gains. And yes, if you can help someone in the process, that would be great. Now, as far as one-to-one relationships are concerned, there is this issue that Venus and Mars have been in semi-square. In fact, they are. Venus and Mars are in semi-square to each other. So it's something you're starting to feel. And so when you've got a semi-square aspect between Venus and Mars, it might suggest from an Aries point of view that perhaps you and someone else don't quite see eye to eye. And if you get really close to someone today, you'll just realize that there's a lot of tension, that you and someone else are making each other nervous, especially if you don't have some common goal. Okay, if you can both engage in something constructive, that would be fine. But it doesn't matter who the other person is. If you might have spent your whole life with them, but still there is some friction there. And so maybe you shouldn't spend too long in close proximity to another person, because it might just be that there's a certain short-term personality clash, and you and the other person might make each other nervous, and that's probably something that should be avoided. Taurus, I think at the moment you are fairly ambitious. There are things that you want to happen, and I think you want them to happen now. And I think one of the reasons for this is that the moon has gone into Aquarius, and it's making a conjunction to Pluto. And with this conjunction to Pluto, you're feeling that you want results, and you're thinking about the kind of impact you're having on the outside world. And you want to have an impact. You want to be taken seriously. And I think you can be taken seriously, but perhaps you don't have to exaggerate. It may not require as much power as you had imagined, just a little bit of effort, and at the same time maybe a little bit of charm, because a little bit of charm can go a long way. It might not feel like it, because Venus is aspecting the Saturn-Uranus midpoint, so you just might have this nervous energy, which sort of makes you think that there's no real point in interacting with people, because they're going to make you nervous, you're going to make them nervous, and you're never going to get anything done. But if you can use some charm, after all, the moon is making a trine to Venus. Venus is your ruler. Venus is in Gemini. Venus is actually in quite a good position because it's in mutual reception to Mercury. So, Taurus, it's important that you do make the most of your charm. And I think you will sound reasonable. The things you say, the things you explain will sound absolutely logical. And I think this is particularly the case if you're discussing, I don't know, material details, perhaps money. When you talk about money, it will seem clear that you know what you're doing. And I think in most cases, people will just accept that you are in the right. Though turning to close relationships, you do have to be a little careful, because Venus and Mars are in semi-square aspect at the moment. And Venus is your ruler. Mars is ruler of Scorpio, your opposite sign. And so with Venus semi-square Mars, it does seem that you and someone else just are on different wavelengths. And if you try to cooperate on a single venture, it might not work. And you might not even understand each other. And very simple things, I mean, even like trying to create an understanding about some, I don't know, household task. You think you're hearing something and actually you hear something completely different. And that could cause friction. So that Venus semi-square Mars does need to be treated with a certain amount of care. And I probably would repeat what I said to Aries, because when I was talking to Aries, I was suggesting to Aries that Aries doesn't spend too much time with any one person. And I think I'd say the same thing to you. It's just not worth the aggravation and not worth the tension. And perhaps instead you should just focus on, what matters to you, and perhaps move around. Yes, you are quite charismatic, but you don't have to spend all your time focusing your charisma on one person. Try, if possible, to move around from person to person and allow your charisma to spread over a fairly wide audience. Gemini. Mercury is your ruler, and Mercury is in Taurus, and Mercury is in mutual reception to Venus. So Mercury is actually not in such a bad place because of that mutual reception. That mutual reception gives Mercury strength and allows you to communicate, but also to communicate in a way that is not jarring. You can put people at their ease without really having to try very hard. And at the same time, you can be a bit of a typical Gemini. You can try talking about one thing, and if that doesn't work, you can just flip into something else. So you can move from one thing to another very quickly, and that may help you just move from one social scene to another. Perhaps you might be on the phone to one person and on the phone to another person and be talking about completely different things, being focused on completely different priorities, and that just gives you a certain amount of flexibility. But I do think that when you are communicating with people, it's just very important that you don't give them everything. You don't want to reveal everything, because if you reveal too much, you might rouse people's suspicions, completely unnecessary suspicions. I'm not suggesting you're doing anything devious, but if you say more than you have to, you might find that you're at the receiving end of questions that you don't really have to answer, or at least don't want to answer. And so why bother with questions, barrage of questions? That is not satisfactory. So that is a good reason for not revealing too much, because the more you reveal, the more you have to explain. And today, Mercury, which is your ruler, is sextile Saturn. And I think that Mercury sextile Saturn could actually be very useful. It allows you to streamline some of your ideas and also to communicate in a way that is very down to earth, if you want to. And that's what you can really strive for. So that means not saying more than you have to. That means keeping it simple and not making things complicated. It's sometimes rather fun if you're a Gemini saying something offbeat and something that just comes from nowhere, but people think, what is that? What do you mean? Are you trying to scare me? Whatever. It's tempting to do that because it's fun. But I would suggest that you show some discipline. Your job today is not to cause a stir. Your job today is to allow people to relax and to trust you. And I think that is very much something you can do. Though one thing I do have to warn you about, Gemini, is that some of your thoughts may be a little bit dark. And I'm saying this as a Gemini, I am a Gemini talking to Geminis, and some of your thoughts could be a bit dark, and you might at certain times see things from the absolute worst possible view. You might think that of all the possible things that can happen, the least favourable, the most damaging thing will happen. And there's a danger that that could grind you to a standstill. So I would urge you not to exaggerate and not to dwell too much on the negative. Now, a bit of pessimism is always a good thing, because you've got to be armed against things suddenly going wrong, things not working out as expected, but you can take that pessimism too far. So if you find yourself becoming increasingly negative, increasingly pessimistic, then perhaps you should stop and think and ask yourself, why are you thinking about that? What are you doing it? I mean, I know it's sometimes a bit fun to be negative if you're a Gemini, and it can be fun to always look at the other point of view, perhaps to sort of consider the reality or consider a possible reality where things go wrong. That can be fun in a sort of perverse kind of way. But I don't think you want to go down that road. I think you should make sure that you don't become too negative, because once people pick up on it, it just could make things really, really difficult. Cancer. The moon is now for sure in Aquarius. And with the moon in Aquarius, I think there's a certain sense in which you're feeling somewhat detached. I mean, your emotions are strong. There's no doubt about it. You have powerful feelings, but you are able to detach those feelings from what's actually going on in the real world. And by showing some detachment, you are actually able to strengthen yourself, so you don't have to get personally involved in other people and their dramas. Sure, there are temptations to get involved in people's dramas, but I think you're going to be able to resist those temptations. Besides, it's a big waste of time. And I think that today, Cancer, you're going to want to focus on what is important. What is important to you, not what is important to other people. You've done enough of that, enough worrying about what other people think, what other people want. You can afford, I think, at the moment, to be a bit selfish and to start to explore your own interests. And that doesn't need to be advertised. You can indeed do things in your own way, at your own pace, and really, I don't think you have to discuss it. It's your own way of doing things. Though the moon is making a trine to Venus. And, moon is your ruler. Venus is the planet of relationships. So it may be that you have a chance today to have some fairly low profile contact with another person. And the contact in itself doesn't seem to be very meaningful, but it may be moving towards a new way of relating. And that might be something you need to consider. Perhaps you and another person haven't been talking to each other. Perhaps you fell out. Perhaps circumstances split you up or set you on different paths. But now things have changed, and I think you're beginning to appreciate that you and this other person have got a lot in common. But it's not something you need to shout about. It just seems that quiet communication with the right person can really start to create some momentum, and also to create some structure, because it's not just that we've got Moon trine Venus, we've also got Mercury sextile Saturn. And Saturn is, of course, ruler of Capricorn, which is your opposite sign. Mercury is the communication planet, and Mercury is in mutual reception with Venus, the planet of relationships. So with Mercury sextile Saturn, that does indicate that there is someone who is quite keen to talk. There's something they want to discuss with you. And I would suggest that you do go along with it. You are prepared to discuss things. You might think that it's a waste of time, but once the discussion starts, you'll actually realize that it's actually very constructive. Though you don't have to give too much away, because fundamentally today is about your boundaries, making sure that those boundaries are not breached and that you are protected, and that emotionally you are self-sufficient. So I think that you can reach out to other people, but in such a way that you're not compromised. Leo, you do understand that you're living in a difficult world. I mean, we're all living in a difficult world. And I think that with the Sun aspecting the Pluto North Node midpoint, I think the difficulties in the world are particularly clear to you, and they bother you, and you can kind of see the way things are going. And again, I'm not talking about you or your loved ones, I don't think. It's just more about the world in general, and perhaps particular groups of people. You can maybe you're starting to aware that certain groups of people, things are not going well for them, and that things could get worse. And I suppose that has been, intensified. At least your subjective experience, your subjective feelings about the matter have perhaps been intensified by watching the news, looking at the TV, social media. It's all becoming very clear to you, and it's all becoming somewhat worrying. But you shouldn't, completely take it to heart. You just have to, kind of work out what you should be doing, if anything. And I think that you can't do anything on your own. You certainly can't cure the world's problems on your own. I think that you can almost certainly benefit from another person's company, because the moon is now in Aquarius, and Aquarius is your opposite sign, and the moon is making a trine to Venus. And with that moon trine Venus, I think there's a good chance that today you can connect with like-minded people, people who share your concerns, share your priorities, and who will understand your particular perspective. So, don't be alone. It's very important not to be alone today, because I do think that you really can benefit by interaction with people who are on your wavelength, and that is very important. Now, if you do nothing, if you are completely isolated, then sure, you might have your concerns and you might dwell on these big worrying issues that you can do nothing about. Yet with other people, it's a different matter. And there are a couple of people who you're on their wavelength, and perhaps together you can actually create some plan of action. I mean, if you're interested in politics or campaigning, or there's something in your community but you're not happy about, then with the right company you can perhaps start to create the beginnings of, I don't know, political action. It is possible. Maybe right now you need to be a bit of an activist. Yeah, you can do it if that's important to you. Virgo. Mercury is your ruler. And so in trying to understand what's happening to Virgos, Mercury is something we really do need to consider. Now, Mercury at the moment is making a sextile aspect to Saturn, and I think that sextile aspect to Saturn is actually quite grounding. It allows you to concentrate on the things that matter, and I don't think that you're going to be distracted, and I think that you're going to be helped by the fact that some of the main people you have to deal with today are actually quite serious, and they can, in the main, be trusted. And perhaps when you start talking about the things that bother you with them, you'll get some good feedback. And at the same time, I do think you're going to be able to express yourself very well. That doesn't mean doing loads and loads of talking. It just means being able to say the things that matter. And yeah, I think that people are going to listen. And you're able to keep things simple and also be quite independent. I don't think you're going to be totally overwhelmed by other people. Sure, you know other people are important, but you're not going to be overwhelmed. And I think that you'll be able to have a clear sense of structure and order. And I think this will be particularly useful if you're working today, or you're going into work, or you're involved in business, or some aspect of your career development. It will all come together very nicely. And at the same time, I think you're going to be pretty good at organizing other people, in a way that they don't find offensive, because Mercury, which is your ruler, is in mutual reception to Venus. Mercury is in Taurus, which is a sign ruled by Venus. Venus is in Gemini, which is a sign ruled by Mercury, so hence a mutual reception. And then we've got the moon trine Venus, and that really does allow you to be on other people's wavelength, but at the same time be able to push a particular agenda. And I suppose it's an agenda that relates to organization, at least if that's what you want. You can indeed allow people and encourage people to do things your way, but in such a way that they don't think they're doing things your way. It feels natural, and maybe you can just use a little bit of gentle persuasion to just give people that extra push. Though, Virgo, it is very important today that you are positive and you do see the best in people and situations. The reason I'm saying that is because Mercury, which is your ruler, is making an aspect to the Mars-Saturn midpoint. I think it's a semi-square to the Mars-Saturn midpoint. And so there may be times today when you're asking yourself, well, is there a point? Can you really do it? And you might actually think that maybe you can't do it, and there might be a lot of self-doubt. And maybe you'll pick up on other people's negativity. Maybe you'll pick up on the negativity of the whole world. That is certainly a possibility. So in a way, you've got to sort of snap out of it. You can't be negative. You can be realistic, but you can't be negative. And you have to get the difference. You have to understand the difference. You be realistic, sure. But if you're just being negative for the sake of being negative, you're really not going to accomplish anything. Finally, I should say that from a heliocentric perspective, Mercury is conjunct Mars. And with that heliocentric Mercury-Mars conjunction, there is some possibility that Virgos get angry. And when you're angry, you might say things which could be quite cutting. I suppose you may feel frustrated, you may feel confused, just for moments. There may be moments of frustration and confusion where you don't know what's going on, and then you lash out. Now, it's possible that by lashing out, you get people's attention and they start doing things your way. On the other hand, you could make matters worse by lashing out with your words. You might just cause offence. So, Virgo, if you do find yourself under pressure and you do feel like lashing out, ask yourself whether it is really the right thing to do. Libra, it's, I think, quite a mixed day. I mean, I think it can be a very good day, but there's some danger that you spoil it. So I suppose I should start with what might go wrong. And perhaps one of the problems of the day is that you are feeling a little bit nervous. You want things to happen. That's good. It's always good to want things to happen. But there is this question in your mind whether you really can make things happen. And you may feel that just other people are in your way, and that, if you really want something, it just has to be constantly delayed, it has to be held back, and you may just have doubts about whether actually you can accomplish anything, and that's going to lead to just more tension. I mean, that's the way it could be, but I'm not saying that is the way it will be. And I think that you do benefit from the moon moving into Aquarius, because the moon in Aquarius is making a trine to Venus, and Venus is, of course, your ruler. And Venus, in some respects, is in quite a good position because it is in mutual reception to Venus. And with that moon trine Venus, I think that you do have to focus on what is important and what is possible. I mean, what is actually making you nervous? What is bothering you? And I think what is bothering you fundamentally is the attitude of other people. You're a Libran. Other people are important. You put great store in how other people are responding to you. And if you inhabit a social world, then there may be times when you just feel there is no point because other people are just on a different wavelength to you, or perhaps they just are suffering from inertia, and we're getting a sense of stagnation. But if you just forget about other people for the moment, you put other people to one side, and you just say to yourself, what can you, as a Libran, accomplish on your own without needing any support? So think about all the things you can do today which don't require outside assistance. I think that's the important point. And just go and see what you can accomplish. And once you've started to accomplish things, it may be at that stage that you can start to be more sociable, because you'll have the confidence to deal with other people and their negativity. And so in the end, if you handle things well, Libra, then I think the day could actually start to flow, and things will happen. And I think that things will happen in your favour. But it all starts with you. It doesn't start with other people. It starts with you. You need to make things happen on your own before worrying about other people and whether or not they're going to block you, support you, not support you. These are questions that Librans should not overburden themselves with today. Put yourself first and let everything else fall into place. Scorpio, you are in some respects feeling quite introspective. There is a conjunction between the Moon and Pluto today, and this conjunction between the Moon and Pluto is pretty strong, and I think that this conjunction Moon and Pluto could almost drag you down, but I don't mean drag you down in a really very negative sense. It's just preventing you from moving outwards. The Moon Pluto is pushing you down inwards, perhaps into your inner world. And you are starting to focus on what you feel is important to you, and what's happening out there, it doesn't matter so much. You just don't want to deal with it. And I suppose you have to ask yourself why you are doing what you are doing. Now, if you are just focusing on yourself and what's important to you to the exclusion of everything else, and you're just doing it because you don't want to be bothered, the outside world just seems perhaps threatening or maybe beneath you. If that's your attitude, then I don't think that is very positive. If, on the other hand, you accept your own seriousness and the importance of your ambitions and your goals, and indeed the importance of who you are, and at the same time you're ready to accept that some people can be trusted, because the Moon is making a trine to Venus, and it's not just making a conjunction to Pluto. And so there is this possibility that you can draw some people in. And now I don't want to go too into the sort of the Pluto myth. We always think about the Pluto myth, isn't it? Hades and Persephone, isn't it? How Persephone ate 6 pomegranate seeds, and she had to spend 6 out of the 12 months in Hades. And in this case, I'm almost thinking that you're like Hades when you drag people in. Once people get close to you, they might find it's actually difficult to leave. Maybe you want them to leave. Maybe you don't want them around. But if there's someone you want around you, then I think you're going to have a powerful magnetic force. But you then have to consider, are you being constructive? Now, this might be about your home and your family life. Think about the people around you in your home and your family and what kind of impact you're having on them. Yes, you are having a powerful impact. I'm fairly sure about that. But are you having this impact because you're trying to help them? Or are you having this impact because you're overly focused on yourself and your interests? So you've got to work out why you're doing what you're doing. And you just have to make sure that you are constructive, at every step of the way. And I think that, with relationships in general, I do think a certain amount of caution is required because Mars, ruler of Scorpio, is semi-square Venus. And yes, you are attractive. And as I've already suggested, you can draw people in. But there's still a certain conflict between you and the important people in your life. Maybe just different priorities, seeing things in different ways. And I think the temptation, Scorpio, is to think that you can somehow steamroller the other person into getting them to think about things from your point of view. And I think that would be wrong. And I think it would be unrealistic. You can't steamroller anyone at the moment. You just have to, I think, accept that you and other people are not always going to be on the same wavelength, even if those other people are really close to you. There's always going to be a distance. There's always going to be a difference of opinion. And I do think today that that is something that you need to respect. Sagittarius. I think Sagittarius, it's actually quite a nice day. I think that things are really starting to move, probably more than they have been over the last day or two. I think over the last day or two, there might have been times when things felt a little bit stuck, but now you're starting to see, I think, real traction. It seems that, for example, the things you say are being noticed. And I think that in that sense, you're helped by the fact that there is a conjunction between the moon and Pluto. And with that conjunction between the moon and Pluto, you can say things that that really get you noticed. And at the same time, the moon is trine Venus. And so you can get noticed in a way that is not confrontational, it's not jarring. The things you say will make sense, and they will grab people's attention, but in a sort of a fairly pleasant way. So it's important, Sagittarius, that you don't underestimate yourself. Also, Sagittarius, you have to remember that there is a quintile between Jupiter and Saturn. Of course, Jupiter is your ruling planet. And quintile, as I said when I was sort of introducing the general planetary picture, quintile is quite a man-made, style-orientated aspect. And with this Jupiter quintile Saturn, it's about creating structure for something which in the first instance is not structured. So if you want something to change, and I think many Sagittarians actually do want something to change with this quintile between Jupiter and Saturn, you have to introduce this change, tell people how you want things to change. I think they will listen to you. But then you've got to make these changes sustainable. That's always the problem. We can all have brilliant ideas. We can always try something new for a day or two. But are we able to actually create something that continues, that is sustainable. And I think, Sagittarius, that's something you really need to focus on. That Saturn is about creating a structure for something. You have the ideas, people like your ideas, but are they going to carry on liking their ideas? And so you have to think about how you're going to make something that starts off as being temporary, just sort of random inspiration, and turning into something permanent. And that could be a challenge, not just for today, but maybe over the next few days. So really do think about that. It's just not enough to have good ideas. It's just not enough to have an imagination. You have to actually think about grounding those ideas and your imaginings in the real world. As far as relationships are concerned, I think you have to be a little bit careful in terms of listening too much to one person. Especially if you've got ideas. We know you've got ideas. I've just talked about the ideas you're having. But there are a couple of people who can be very negative and, frankly, not particularly supportive if they get overly negative. Some people are just negative for the sake of being negative. And I think, Sagittarius, the last thing you want at the moment is someone being overly negative, because that's just going to undermine your confidence, and you might start to question yourself. No, that's not something you want. You want people who are going to be constructive. So today it's just very important that you choose your company correctly. Sure, you can have people who give you gentle criticism, but there are some people who can go beyond gentle criticism and can actually end up sort of questioning the whole fundamentals of what you're trying to achieve, and that's not what you want. Though I should say that Mercury is sextile Saturn, and with Mercury sextile Saturn, I'm sure that there's someone out there who really can be trusted. You need someone to trust, and you need someone to bounce ideas off, but someone who's not going to be horribly negative in the process. And I think that Mercury sextile Saturn might be the person you're looking for. It could be a member of your family, someone you're actually related to, who is prepared to listen and give you good advice. If not, could be a close friend, someone you know really well. It's that kind of person that I think you should be focusing on. Capricorn, you are feeling a little bit uncertain. You can see that there are things going on, and that you've got something to say and you've got something to offer. But at the same time, you're a bit concerned about how you are going to present your message. And you might think that people aren't going to listen to you. Or you might just feel that fundamentally you don't understand, and that if you try to communicate, you won't get the words right. But I think that your fears are largely unjustified, because Mercury is making a sextile to Saturn, and Mercury is the communication planet. And Mercury is actually quite well placed at the moment, because Mercury is in mutual reception to Venus, and also Mercury is in Taurus, which is a very Capricorn-friendly sign. And with Mercury making a sextile aspect to Saturn, I think that your ability to communicate is actually quite good, better than you realize. So don't doubt yourself, and you don't have to make too much of an effort to be heard. Just say what's important to you and let everything else sort itself out. Just because once you've said a few words, the words will, I think, have an impact, and that will give you the encouragement to say more. And in the end, I do think that people are going to listen to you, and they might actually find you really quite interesting because, you do have something to offer, and what you've got to offer is a way of doing things which is actually quite interesting and certainly has a creative edge. I mean, Mercury's in Taurus. From your perspective, Taurus is a very creative sign, and I understand that Jupiter has left Taurus, and so with Jupiter leaving Taurus, you may feel that perhaps things are sort of now harder work than they used to be, but still, you've got Mercury in Taurus, and indeed, you've got Uranus in Taurus. You've actually got an applying Mercury-Uranus conjunction in Taurus, and I think that does make you inspired, and it certainly makes you creative. And I think that creative vision is something you're going to be able to express, and I do think that people will listen to you. Aquarius. Moon is in Aquarius. Doesn't matter what your time zone is, that's where it is. Okay, if you are in Australia or New Zealand, the moon might not go into Aquarius until, I don't know, as late as the mid-morning. That's possible. But even then, the moon is going to be in Aquarius pretty much all day, wherever you are. And I think that you will enjoy the moon being in your sign. I think that you'll be sort of more positive and constructive than you have been of late. And at the same time, you're going to be able to express your vision, and you're going to show that you're an independent thinker and that your ideas really are worth following. So don't be shy with the moon making a trine to Venus. That moon in Aquarius is trining Venus in Gemini, so it's in air signs. You're an air sign, so you've got that trine in air signs, which is going to really allow you to express yourself to the full. And I think that you will come over really as a very interesting and exciting person. So don't hold back. Though when it comes to other people, particularly if you know them well, you may find that their priorities are somewhat strange and somewhat too serious. I mean, I don't think that fundamentally you are in a particularly serious frame of mind. I mean, you understand that things have to be done properly. You understand that, you have to get your message across in a clear and concise way, but that's something you're going to be able to do because Mercury, the communication planet, is making a fortunate aspect to Saturn, so you can make yourself heard, and you'll be able to do it in a mature and constructive way. But still, compared to other people, certain other people, you may be fairly light-hearted, and just some people are just taking the world too seriously. And you then have to work out how to approach this. I mean, you might feel guilty. You might think that you're being too light, but you've got to take the world seriously because other people are taking the world seriously. I don't think that's true. I think it's more the case that some people are being too serious for their own good. You can try to persuade them to lighten up. That is a possibility. Or you could just say, well, let's respect their priorities. If they want to be very serious, if they want to worry about major issues that in a short term we can't do anything about it, then maybe you should just leave them to their own devices for the moment. And then at a later stage, you can sort of return and perhaps they'll have a better perspective on it and then you can continue. So overall, Aquarius, I think it's a constructive day, but don't let other people's seriousness weigh you down. Pisces, you probably feel that you're not really in the mood for doing too much. It's just that you and the rest of the world are just on a slightly different wavelength. You want things done in one way, they want things done in another way, and it's just difficult to find any common ground. And it's a situation that could worry you, but I don't think it should worry you. I think that on your own, there's a lot you can do, there's a lot you can accomplish, and I think if necessary, if really need be, you can still make your position clear. I mean, I'm not saying that you're in a weak position. I mean, you might think you're in a weak position because you're not in the mood for interaction. But if you need to interact, if you need to say something, then actually I think you'll be able to do it with incredible power. And we also shouldn't forget that there is this quintile between Jupiter and Saturn. And I think with this quintile between Jupiter and Saturn, remember, Jupiter is your ruler. And so with the Jupiter-Saturn quintile, you can take your imaginings. Pisceans have always got a vivid imagination, and take your imaginings, which may seem somewhat fantastic, and you can actually ground them in reality. Now the question is, do you need anyone's help in order to do that? Or is this something you can just do on your own? I think in many cases, Pisces, it is something you can do on your own. If other people understand what you're doing, that's great. If they don't, or if you feel they're on a different wavelength, it doesn't matter. So don't underestimate yourself. And I do think in many cases you can do some excellent work without really needing anyone else's assistance. And in fact, if you get too close to certain people, you may feel that they are just a waste of energy. Yeah, some people are a waste of energy. They could just drain you. And that's because Mercury, which is ruler of Virgo, which is your opposite sign, is aspecting the Mars-Saturn midpoint. And so with Mercury aspecting a Mars-Saturn midpoint, some people are just very self-obsessed. They're only thinking about themselves. And perhaps actually they're over-obsessed with their own problems. And I think the last thing you want is people being self-obsessed like that. Now, I understand that some people do have genuine problems and you can help them with their problems. That's true. But it seems that today there are just a lot of people who are just obsessed with their own problems in a way that is really not very constructive, and they're not actually interested in solving their problems. They're just interested in complaining about their problems. And if you have to engage with such people, that would be, as I've already suggested, would be a complete waste of time. And that's it for the 12 signs. and I now want to look at today from the perspective of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Tuesday going to be like for those watching the I Ching segment of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram 37, which is the family. It's, in a way, a very straightforward hexagram. It suggests that today the emphasis is on your family, or perhaps on whichever group you are strongly connected with. I suppose that could be your clan. I suppose it might also be a close circle of friends. I suppose it might be a club or a society. But I think in most cases it is likely to be about the family. And it's just simply saying that the family can be a source of satisfaction and stability and structure. And in a way, that's a bit boring. But, we need to perhaps remember, what is it? The Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. This is not about interesting times. This is about grounding oneself and people doing their duty. And if you're watching this, then the duty is perhaps on you, but also the authority is perhaps on you also. And you understand your organizing role, perhaps in terms of your own family or your household. And I think that you can sort it out really very well. And there's actually a financial element to this. The I Ching talks about being able to balance the books. And I suppose in a traditional family, money has to be spent and money has to come in, and the books have to balance. And it seems that if you're listening to this, maybe you can help the books balance. I think you're going to have a very strong awareness of household finances, what's coming in, what's going out. And I think that your understanding of household finances is going to serve you very well. And if, for example, there's too much money is being spent, I think it'll be quite easy for you to rein the expenditure in and to put things onto a stable footing. And this hexagram, the family, it does move, and it moves to hexagram 13 and with others. Now, the Wilhelm translation of the I Ching said this, just translates this as fellowship with men, and I suppose fellowship with men, I suppose it's somewhat gendered. Could you say fellowship with people? That might be better. I don't think the original translation was meant to be men in particular as a gendered concept. I think it was people in general. Although with the I Ching, you always need to be careful that, sometimes it is literal when you don't expect it. So in certain cases, I suppose fellowship with men might literally be fellowship with people of male gender, but maybe not. And I think perhaps in a more general sense, translating it as with others, at least that's how Greg Winkup in his book on I Ching translates it, might be more useful. And so the family which is the first hexagram, is the basis for one's social life. One's social life doesn't just appear chaotically, meeting people just randomly. One's social life is about something which is centered on the family. And perhaps this means that once you've sorted out the family, you can bring new people in, and perhaps they can also become part of the family. But it seems that through your conscious efforts and your ability to structure things and make sure that everything is in order, you can bring new people into your life. And I think that those new people, they're not going to be disruptive. They're going to make things easier, and I think there's going to be a general atmosphere of cooperation. And that's really the I Ching. It's not wonderfully exciting, but it seems to be very stable. And I think that today you can really benefit from other people's company, and you are the center of things, and you can make sure that everything runs smoothly. Now I want to go back to Algol. Sorry about having to discuss Algol again, but I thought there was more to be said on this fixed star. Now, before I talk about Algol in terms of particular charts, I did want to look at Algol and royalty. I did want to make a few points about how one deals with Algol from, and fixed stars in general, from a technical perspective. Sorry, this is a bit tedious, but I think it needs to be said. The first point about fixed stars is, at least in the way I use them, is that I only use conjunctions. I do not use oppositions or squares or semi-squares or sesquiquadrates. I just see it as being conjunctions. Now, the reason I use only conjunctions is because one reason is I don't want to have too much information. Because if we overuse fixed stars, then we are just bombarded with astrological information and just everything becomes a little bit meaningless. So I only use conjunctions. Then there is the question of orb. How close should a fixed star be before you count it, in order for it to be counted? Now, William Lilly in Christian astrology, he regarded Algol as being really important. He also regarded Regulus as being important. And if I remember rightly, he suggested an orb of 5 degrees for Algol and Regulus. That is quite a large orb. My own inclination is perhaps to use 1 degree, but I'm thinking that's a little bit too narrow. So I would have said 1.5 degrees for Algol, especially if it is applying. So, if Algol is, I don't know, is it 26, 27 degrees, maybe you can start to consider Algol when it's starting to be 23 degrees. But when it gets to 29 degrees, I'm thinking the planet has gone past Algol. Just to me, doesn't quite have the same impact. And I'd probably say the same with other fixed stars, but I'm not suggesting that that should be written in stone. A final point to make about fixed stars is one of epoch. Now, I have a program, Kepler, which tells me whether or not planets are in orb of the fixed stars. I can say what orb I want, and it tells me whether they've got an orb. Now, if you do not have a program and you are working on a list of fixed stars, then you do have to consider the epoch. So, for example, in this book here, which is the fixed stars and constellations, it has a list of the fixed stars and it sets it for the 1920 epoch, or January the 1st, 1920. So if I look at this list, it tells me that on January the 1st, 1920, Algol was at 25.3 Taurus. The thing is, because of precession of the equinox, things move. And the movement is, I think it's 1 degree every 72 years. So if Algol was at 25.3 Taurus on the 1st of January 1920, then 72 years later, on 1st of January 1992, it will be at 26.3 Taurus. So you have to remember that if you're working from a list, you have to look at the epoch, you have to see what date that list is for, and then you have to make an adjustment. And that adjustment, I think, is approximately 1 degree for every 72 years. So do bear that in mind. So, if you see a chart, that's, I don't know, for, 1066, and or something like that, and you see that a planet is at 26 Algol, no, that doesn't mean to say, is it 26 Taurus? No, that doesn't mean to say that that planet is on Algol, because you've got to take into account precession. It's like in the England chart, the moon is at 29 Pisces, and when I see that 29 Pisces, I see, wow, it's on Skeet, because Skeet is at 29 Pisces. And then I have to remember, that's a chart for 1066, and there's been a lot of precession in the last nearly 1,000 years, so that planet is not on Skeet. So I thought I had to make that technical note. Okay, so what I want to do now is look at some charts. Now, it was pointed out to me that there was a portrait of Prince Charles that was unveiled. So several commenters, I think, mentioned this, and it was unveiled on May the 14th. And there is a suggestion that this was an important event. This was, I think, his first portrait of his reign that was unveiled. And this portrait had an incredible red background, just red. And it just, a lot of people said it was like the sort of fires of hell. And so you had this Prince Charles, seemed to be fairly accurately drawn, but then in the background, you just said it was all red. And I think this portrait has been widely criticized. And I think we have a suggestion here that somehow it's symbolically important, that we're getting an idea about what the king is really like. I mean, okay, we don't want to exaggerate it too much, but we do need to really consider that, and we should therefore look at Prince Charles's look at the chart for when that portrait was unveiled. So here's the chart for his unveiling of the portrait. I don't know what time the portrait was unveiled. I spent about 10 minutes trying to work out what time it was unveiled. I gave up. So I set the chart for noon. And at that moment when the portrait was unveiled, well, not at that moment, because I didn't find out what the moment was, you can see that there was a Sun-Jupiter conjunction on Algol. And okay, the sun was a little before Algol, a couple of degrees off. So this is what I mean by orb. I think because the sun was applying to Algol and Jupiter was very close to Algol, I think we can treat that Sun-Jupiter conjunction as being on Algol. And I suppose you could see the sun as being representative of the king. And so when you saw that picture, and remember the whole concept of the Gorgon, Algol, because Algol is the head of the demon, it's the head of the Gorgon, there's always that sense of shock, indeed of petrifying shock. You reveal the portrait and you see the king for what he really is. And in terms of that portrait, we see hellfire. And so that's one aspect of Charles and perhaps of Algol, and perhaps that's a way of introducing this concept that maybe the royal family and Algol do have a certain connection. And it was quite a difficult week. I mean, I remember the day after was when the Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico got shot. So that was also the Sun-Jupiter conjunction on Algol when he got shot. So we had several rather difficult things going on in the world with that Sun-Jupiter conjunction on Algol. And as was pointed out by one of the commenters, I made this glaring omission yesterday when I was going through all of these planets with Algol, that I'd missed some really important royals. One royal I'd have missed is, of course, Princess Diana. Now, there is Princess Diana's chart, and Diana has Venus on Algol. I've mentioned this before. I don't want to spend too long talking about Diana's Venus on Algol, but her Venus on Algol is square Uranus, square Moon. I think that, when you're looking at fixed stars, and if you can see other aspects going on in a chart, that can give you just a greater sense of what that actually means. So with Diana's chart, you can see she had Moon opposition Uranus, and she had Venus on the T. And with Venus square Uranus, Venus square Moon, and Venus on Algol, that does suggest the difficulty there. And Venus on Algol can represent death, destruction, something bad happening. I suppose a woman being killed. Okay, Diana wasn't decapitated. I don't think, no, she wasn't decapitated. But still, she died a violent death in a car accident. And there is that Venus square Uranus, Venus square Jupiter, and it's on Algol. And that Algol does show up in other members of a royal family, like her son. So William, if we look at Prince William's chart, there's his Venus at 2417 Algol, a 2417 Taurus. So in other words, actually that's Victoria Nuland's chart. Not with Prince William's chart. Maybe I'll talk about Victoria Nuland's chart in a moment, because she's got Venus conjunct Algol as well, because she was born on the same day as Princess Diana. So there's Prince William's chart. So Prince William has his Venus at 2540 Taurus. So he was born on Princess Diana's Venus return. And so that Venus, female planet on Algol, it's projectable. It's likely to say something about the women he gets involved with. And of course, the first woman he's involved with is his mother. And his mother gets killed in this car accident. And now we've got a situation with his wife, and his wife, I don't know, I assume that she's recovering from this cancer diagnosis, but his wife has certainly been very ill. And so we perhaps have a repeated theme there with his Venus conjunct Algol. So we've got that. I now want to talk about, I don't know, I suppose, I feel this is, I don't know whether it's the right thing to do, but there's Princess Lilibet. Now, Lilibet is Meghan and Harry's daughter. I think the second daughter, isn't that right? Sorry, second child. So the first child was Prince Archie, and then the second child was Lilibet. And I was looking at her chart, and Lilibet has Algol on the midheaven. And, well, how do we interpret that? Well, the thing is that the midheaven is the mother. If you take standard Western astrology, you take the mother is the 10th house and the father is the 4th house. So if you want to get information about the mother, you might look at the 10th house. So I'm not really interested in what happens to Lilibet. I'm more interested in what this chart says about her mother. And so first thing is, mother is midheaven conjunct Algol. That's not great. That perhaps says something about the mother. Perhaps as how Lilibet perceives mother, or will perceive her mother, as maybe someone who is quite petrifying, as someone who is... there may be issues of jealousy here, and power, with Algol on the midheaven. But it's the midpoints that I find interesting. And I'm now going to show you some hypothetical planets. So the chart is now going to get a bit crazy as I set up some hypothetical planets. And I'm going to put up the 8 trans-Neptunians. So if you look at this chart, Lilibet has her Hades at 9 Cancer and her Kronos at 12 Cancer. So Hades is quite a dark energy. It is about things which are not particularly pleasant. And Kronos is about authority. And if you look at Lilibet's chart, she has got the moon conjunct Chiron. Now, the moon is, of course, a universal significator of the mother in any chart. And so that moon conjunct Chiron in the 8th house may say something about her mother and her perception of her mother. And there may be a certain sense of uncomfortableness there, I think. It's also a mother, moon in Aries, who is very pushy, very assertive. That's how that moon in Aries is going to work. And one of Lilibet's great challenges, I think, is going to be to take ownership of that moon. Generally speaking, in a female chart, the ownership of the moon doesn't really take place until sort of early 20s. I think very often women in childhood, they more are like their sun, and they have to grow into their moons. In male charts, it's the opposite. You start off as your moon and you grow into your sun. So she's going to have to take ownership of that moon in Aries at some stage, probably in her early 20s. But as it stands, that moon in Aries is her mother, and it's conjunct Chiron. And I do think that suggests issues with the mother. And that moon in Aries is exactly square Kronos. Kronos is it's a hypothetical planet similar to Saturn, but it's about authority. And so we have a moon square Chiron. This is an authoritarian mother, quite a controlling mother, I would have said, who kind of likes to lay down the law, who perhaps runs the household in a particular way. And that's perhaps how she perceives the mother. And when you're dealing with hypothetical planets, you should try to use quite tight orbs. So there is moon square Hades, but that is nearly 3 degrees. That's nearly a 3-degree orb. So you'd say, well, you can't really count that. But the midheaven, moon conjunct Algol, midheaven conjunct Algol is on the moon Hades midpoint. It's also on the moon Hades midpoint, and it's on the Hades Kronos midpoint. But I think I'm particularly interested in the fact that it's on the moon Hades midpoint, and I think having the midheaven on the moon Hades midpoint, when the midheaven is conjunct Algol on the moon Hades midpoint, and I think that says something very grim about the mother. this mother seems to be potentially a really difficult person, and I think there is a real possibility that, Lilibet and her mother may clash, and maybe Lilibet is going to see her mother for what she really is. I could go on, but I think that it all starts with that Algol on the midheaven. That's the kind of a warning sign that Lilibet has got Algol conjunct the midheaven. And then when we look in further detail, and we see that the midheaven is conjunct the moon Hades midpoint, and it's, I think, also conjunct the it's also aspecting the Hades Kronos midpoint. So there is something difficult, and something about control and authority, and I think there are mother issues there in Lilibet's chart. But that's my view. And plus, of course, we've got the moon in Aries conjunct Chiron, and I think that suggests further problems. And I wanted to also compare Lilibet's chart with Meghan's chart. So if we look at Meghan's chart, there is Meghan's chart. So we have Lilibet's chart in the middle, and this is her mother on the outside. And you can see that Meghan has her Uranus at 26 degrees 3 Scorpio. So that Uranus is right on Lilibet's IC. It's quite disruptive, isn't it? Plus, it's opposition Algol. I don't like to use oppositions really to fixed stars, but I think in this case it may be relevant. It's opposition Algol, plus Uranus is on the moon Hades midpoint. So I think that Uranus, that Meghan's Uranus is really quite disruptive there. Another thing about this chart, I know I'm kind of going off the subject of Algol a bit, but there is Meghan's Mars. And so Meghan's Mars at 11 Cancer is square Lilibet's moon at 12 Aries. And so I don't know at what stage that moon square Mars is going to activate. But I'm thinking that when Lilibet, I don't know, hits adolescence, I think there could be trouble between mother and daughter with that moon square Mars, and also the Uranus on the IC. And maybe this is something Meghan needs to consider, how she relates to her daughter, because I don't know, I think here there could be something wrong. And I think the sooner it gets dealt with, the better. So that's Meghan and Lilibet's chart. Another royal who had Venus on Algol. Hold on, let me get rid of these hypotheticals. They are cluttering things up. Okay, is Edward VIII. So Edward VIII was the king who abdicated in 1936 because he married this American divorcee. And Edward VIII, here's Edward VIII's chart. So Edward VIII was born on June the 23rd, 1894. And you can see that he has his Venus at 23 Taurus. So his Venus was fairly close to Algol. And you think perhaps with that Venus, you think perhaps this is the woman he gets attracted to. And so that Venus in Taurus may reflect Wallis Simpson. I think there are questions about Wallis Simpson's character and what kind of person she was. I mean, I haven't really gone into detail here, but he was transfixed by Wallis Simpson. And I suppose if you say Venus on Algol, maybe she was the Medusa. She petrified him and caused absolute chaos. I'm sure there's another side to the story, but that's just one way of looking at it. Now, that's it with the royals. I did quickly want to mention Victoria Nuland. Victoria Nuland, remember, was working for the State Department, and she was very integral in stirring up the war in Ukraine. Remember, she was a cookie monster who went to Kiev in 2014, was handing out cookies to the protesters and the demonstrators, and she was very much involved, in stirring up the war. And I think she was, not a war, but she was involved in this change of government. The elected president was effectively overthrown, and she was orchestrating it. And she started a process which, of course, led to this war with Russia, in which I believe something like 500,000 Ukrainians have died. And she has Venus conjunct Algol, so because she's born on the same day as Princess Diana. Now, with Diana, we can perhaps see two sides of Algol. With Diana, Venus conjunct Algol was perhaps portending her death. And how she died, the process of her dying. With Victoria Nuland is alive, still very much alive, but this is Algol as in, Victoria Nuland is the Gorgon. She is a sort of destructive female force which has encouraged Ukraine to make moves which have really led to its destruction. And she has stirred up this war. And I think that we can really see the negativity there of Venus in Taurus conjunct Algol. I want to look at two more people who've got Venus conjunct Algol. One is Imelda Marcos. I don't really know much about Imelda Marcos. Remember, she was the wife of Ferdinand Marcos, who was president of the Philippines. And Imelda Marcos was famous for her shoe collection. When she was overthrown, I think in the sort of mid-80s. Not she was overthrown, her husband was overthrown. She was famous for her, I think she had 3,000 pairs of shoes, and she was clearly very much into herself, and she had, and her riches and getting rich at the expense, and her family were, of course, very corrupt. They had this control over the Philippines, and she had Venus conjunct Algol. I thought I would just mention that. Another person who had Venus conjunct Algol was where has he gone? Sid Vicious. So Sid Vicious, born May the 10th, 1957. There's his Venus at 26 Algol. So from what I understand about Sid Vicious, he had some fairly disastrous relationships with women. So his mother, I believe, was a drug addict, and he had problems with heroin, and his mother didn't help. His mother had a disastrous impact on him. Plus, he started to get involved with this woman, Nancy Spungen, who was also taking heroin, and these two women, between them, led him to his death. And he kind of got transfixed on Nancy Spungen, and everyone else thought she was really bad for him. And I think in the end, she got stabbed or something. Did he stab her? I get confused about that. So perhaps, was he taking the Perseus myth too seriously there? I don't know. But Nancy Spungen would be Venus in Algol, Venus conjunct Algol. It could represent his mother as well. So I think that is a good example of Algol working. Finally, I want to go back to the theme of Algol and explosions. So the first nuclear explosion was on July the 16th, 1945. That was the first nuclear explosion. And Mars was on Algol when that happened. And then I was thinking back to the First World War. Now, First World War, every single day practically, ghastly things were happening. Loads of people were getting killed. Can you really distinguish between one event and another? Pretty difficult, I would have said. You know, in the Somme, I don't know, 50, 100,000 people killed in 24 hours. You know, it's, or whatever. But there was one particular event in the First World War, which was, it happened in 1917, and I think I've got the approximate date for it here. It's in the Battle of Messines, which I think was close to Ypres. I think this is the right time. So the thing about this battle, the Battle of Messines, is that what the British did, I think maybe some of the Commonwealth allies, they dug holes. They mined things. So they dug a hole under German trenches. And what they did was they dug a hole under a German trench and they just filled this hole with explosives. I think some massive amount of explosives. It might have been 400 tons or some huge amount of explosives. And at this battle, they just exploded it. And I believe 10,000 Germans were killed. And this was the largest amount of people killed deliberately in any explosion prior to Hiroshima. So this was a huge, deliberate attempt to kill as many people as possible with an explosion. And no one exceeded that until Hiroshima. And so this is a chart for when that happened. And so you will see that when that mine went off, there was a Mars-Jupiter conjunction on Algol. And I think that gives us an idea about how Algol might work, because we saw Mars on Algol at the time of the New Mexico explosion, atomic explosion on July the 16th, 1945. And so that might be a hint about Algol and how it works. Mercury is sort of in that conjunction as well. It's not technically on Algol, but it's moving there. And so this goes back to my concerns about the Mars-Uranus conjunction on Algol on July the 15th of this year. So that all kind of fits together. And so we do have to be, I think, really concerned about big explosions, though I'm not saying that there's going to be a nuclear attack. I'm still kind of trying to work out what's going on. But anyway, I thought I'd continue with the theme on Algol today, with particular emphasis on the royal family. And I think for the moment I've said enough about Algol. So thank you very much for listening to me. If you enjoyed this video, I would be very grateful if you were to like it. If you enjoyed this video and you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thanks again for listening, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.